Alrighty. So, hi everyone, and welcome to today's Cloudera live session. Ade and myself are going to be talking about a new framework, the document that we've released called the Continuous Operations for Production Machine Learning. It is a detailed document that goes through a lot of the things that we see as processes and methodologies for helping our enterprise customers implement machine learning in production. This is not the actual production webinar. That is going to be happening next week. This is just the two of us talking through what we just spoke about when we were going through coming up with the document, stuff that we see happening at customers, and just generally kind of giving you an understanding of our viewpoints coming into this. The format that we're going to take is just kind of asking each other questions as we go, but we'd like to make this interactive. We would like to invite some participation. So the first question is, where are you actually watching from? Please put information into the comments so we can just see that everything's working. I'm based in the Netherlands, where I'm actually South African, so I'm used to like lots of sun, and I'm now living in Northern Europe where we don't have sun. So I'm struggling a little bit with this level of integration, but it's okay, so we're getting there, but that's where I am. I'm a machine learning specialist at Cloudera, so my job is to help our customers implement their machine learning projects into production, taking things live, just understanding our technologies and capabilities. And with me today is Ade, who is going to introduce herself now.
Hey, yes, I'm Ade. I'm based in London. Unlike Jeff, I am used to dreary cold weather, so that is good because that's what we've got. I also work in machine learning within Cloudera. I head up machine learning services in Cloudera Fast Forwards, helping customers to build out their machine learning strategies and their approach to making machine learning return on their investment.
Great. All righty.
So if you could just drop in. No, Jeff, please carry on. I was just inviting people to tell us where they were.
Okay, yes. So in the comments, you can just drop in information as to where you are. And then the other thing is, if there's something that we don't cover during our chat session, please put a question into the comments. It will come from our amazing broadcast team who are in the background sorting everything out for us. We will get to know what the questions are, and then we'll be able to answer them right during the live stream. All righty. So opening question, why did we write this document? Ade, why did we think we needed to put this document together?
I think there are a number of reasons. I think a lot of it was down with customer experience. So we had a number of customers who have reached a level of maturity where they're beginning to feel the cost of the overheads of running machine learning. And so we were getting a lot more questions and conversations around machine learning. And I think so in conversations we've been having, we'd also we both observed that we had customer discussions where customers seemed a little bit stuck at the proof of concept phase and weren't necessarily moving many of these models into deployment. And that was an area of concern because, as we've already said, investing in machine learning isn't cheap. So if you're doing it, you want a good return.
Yeah.
At least that's what I remember. That's
okay. What I found, I guess because we're in different parts of the organization, so you tend to be focused in dealing with more customers specifically as part of the professional services component. I'm in field engineering, so it is technically more customer engagement around pre-sales and post-sales. And one of the things that I found, a question I got asked a lot was, what are our best practices? And it turns out that machine learning doesn't really have a best practices per se. Like you have Kimball as a design architecture, or like generally you can go and get an off-the-shelf architecture for data warehousing or streaming or one of those, but there actually didn't exist one. So, to me, that was a thing that I thought that we should be able to create, or at least I couldn't find one. So there didn't seem to be something that was similar out there that was available that I figured that would be a good replacement for this. So it's interesting because it comes to the question of what particular problem are we trying to solve? Now, from my context, it's specifically to try and solve the problem around packaging some best practices, but you must see problems in terms of actually trying to deploy models at customers. So like from a professional services perspective, where you're actually helping our customers get stuff live, they must be experiencing like problems that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, I think it's like very holistic challenges, if you like. So everything from finding the right data within their organization to even build the proof of concept.
Yeah.
But then once they're built, getting them into deployment, like you said, but also building or having in production machine learning applications that won't get people in trouble with regulators, that will support the end users, in which case they need to be worrying about explainability, that won't become redundant as the data changes, and also that works for just the sheer number of people who are involved in machine learning. So something that works not just for any one particular team, but works for everyone who's involved, everyone from the business users through to the data engineers who are managing the deployment.
Yeah. Okay. And from the perspective of who we intend this for, so like who is the intended audience, I guess it's a like, and we spoke about this. We tried to cover for both managers of data science teams and the actual practitioners. And from my perspective, the people asking me for the best practices are the managers or enterprise architects who are looking for a model, a mechanism that they can use to actually go and do the deployment. So we follow this guideline or this methodology, and this is our plan from a business perspective. But what you tried to cover in a lot of it was specifically for the practitioners. So what do you think they would get out of it?
I think it's again, I'm hoping what they get out of it is a mixed bag, actually, but in a positive way, like a mixed bag of perspectives. I think the first thing that I'm hoping practitioners will get out of it is an understanding of the perspectives of their fellow stakeholders. So who are the other stakeholders in this journey with them, and what are their needs? So viewing this from many different viewpoints is one of the things that I'm hoping practitioners will get out of it. I'm also hoping they will get linked into that first point, that they'll have an understanding also of a way of thinking and looking at machine learning, their machine learning implementations, that is as much about the business requirements from this as it is about the technical metrics of success, that they'll have a broader view of why this is important.
I think that's a very good point about the success factors, because one of the things we spoke about was trying to be quite specific. In an enterprise context, machine learning is there to help solve a visibility problem around something you don't know. You're trying to predict something specific. So you may, like in a manufacturing context, try and predict if something's going to break for predictive maintenance, or you're trying to predict customers leaving you. It's a blind spot that you have, and the more accurately you can predict that, the better you can run your business. But a lot of our customers are not primarily machine learning, it's not their primary focus. They want to use it, but therefore money is being spent on this infrastructure, and there needs to be a return on investment. And if your metric is model performance, it doesn't take that into account. So we've tried to put that particular notion of a consistent business metric that means that in a year's time, you can come back and say this project is successful, or a success or a failure, based on what it provided for the business, not on how accurate a model that you built. Because of this notion that a lot of, like, as we're getting to, and I think it's like probably a Gartner hype cycle type thing, we're sort of on our way down to the trough of disillusionment for a lot of machine learning stuff. And this is just fundamental. It now needs to actually make sense. The people who are spending money on this want to be able to see if they can realize a return on that investment. So that is like a big part of what was the focus, is to say, these are the things that you need to consider, not just the technical aspect of how machine learning works, but also why you're doing this as a business.
And just to come in on that, Jeff, I think this is a really a really good point. There was a paper that I was reading. It came out after we'd already started thinking about writing this, but it's called Machine Learning Practices Outside of Big Tech, and it's just a review of how organizations that aren't big tech, how they cope with the resource constraints and challenges that they have, especially when it comes to responsible development of machine learning. And this point about justification of the expense of any investment in machine learning, I think is something that, as a practitioner, especially in a smaller organization, you don't have the luxury of unending, like infinite budgets, right?
Yeah.
You're going to have to make a justification at some point. And I think one of the risks or challenges that you face as a practitioner in an enterprise is shifting goalposts and being able to say, this is what this particular machine learning application can deliver, and these are the metrics for assessing that, or this is a way to get the business side to be a lot clearer in what they're hoping to achieve. I think is a really important capability as a practitioner in the space, that we don't just take fairly vague, high level exploratory requirements and then try and make something out of that, but also thinking, well, what is ultimately the business outcome you're looking for? How are we going to be measuring value? And that's a conversation that I'm hoping, once people have read the white paper, are able to kind of get a sense of, right, these are the questions I will be asking, because I'm interested not just in the technical performance metrics, but also that I'm able to justify the investment and hopefully get enough investment that this becomes something that is given the green light to go into deployment and actually delivers value.
Yeah. Yes. I see a lot of customers moving past the like science experiment / proof of concept phase around the machine learning projects. And it's a scale up in terms of like not just infrastructure to be robust and capable of delivering those requirements, but also a step up in terms of scrutiny within the business. Like, you've been through this with analytics, you've been through this with data warehousing. We're now at this point with machine learning, which is it needs to be valuable. Otherwise, we're not going to spend money on it. And in the enterprise context, I think a lot of people are now having to justify the spend and having to justify the implementations, the people costs, all of those things. So this is an attempt to at least try focus part of the quantification on metrics that is like can be validated against a return on investment. If we stopped, 10% of our customer base churning, that equals X amount of $1 million in terms of revenue. And since our products are very, very reasonably priced, it makes sense that you would buy from us.
I think, yes, you should. But also, I was just going to, still building on that last point before I kind of move to the next question.
Yeah.
But I think even in cases where the case has been made, so even in situations where the business case has been made and you're not being asked to justify the investment, I still think it's really useful to have a plan for what is going to happen once you're in production. I think the overheads of running machine learning in production can creep up on you, right? You have one or two models in production, and you're just about managing. And then there's like a disproportionate weight that comes with the third model, right? Or something happens that shifts the goalpost even slightly, and the cost of being able to be flexible and adjust to changes in the environment, which is all machine learning is about, can be quite high. And so going in with a plan is really important, especially in cases where you don't have to make any justification. The business value is clear, the organization wants it, and then this becomes critical infrastructure. And this is not the kind of thing that you want to be learning as you go. I think you save yourself a lot of pain if you thought about it at the start. We talked a lot about the business side of things, Jeff. And so I just wanted, I guess if I were listening to this, I would be curious as to whether this is a very technical paper, because we focus so much on the business side. So maybe we should answer that.
Is not programmatic. So it doesn't like it. There are examples and code that illustrate how to do a thing, but it is not the primary imperative. It is largely about putting together a series of steps and processes to follow in order to keep models in production and understand their value over time. It's not a pure technical thing. So this is not an O'Reilly book in that sense. This is more of a white paper about how we view a reasonable methodology for enterprise customers implementing machine learning in production. So with regards to the organizations, though, like, how mature do you think they need to be? Like, where do they need to be on their journey for this to become relevant to them? So when is this an important concern?
Right. We talked about this a fair bit while we were writing the paper, I think. And I guess you can take this with a pinch of salt, because we've invested so much time writing this that of course I would say this. But I think actually at any point in your journey, this is a good thing to be thinking about. So I think very often we see people from a professional services standpoint at the very start of their journey, or at the point that they are looking to make a step change in their investment in machine learning. So we get to see people who are just beginning to think about it and want to maximize the return on their investment. So they want to benchmark themselves, and they want to be aware of any pitfalls that others might have fallen into, so they know how to avoid them. That's at the very start of the journey. And like I said earlier, I think even if you don't have to make the business case for investment in machine learning, and even if you don't have a problem of getting stuck in proof of concept stage and not moving to deployment, even if you have none of those issues, it is still useful to have a plan for what you will do once your machine learning applications are in production. It's a really good way, I think, of teasing out all sorts of problems that aren't just about the technical implementation and delivery, although that's a big part of what we cover in the white paper and a big part of MLOps. But I think it is also a really good way of looking at the softer side of things, the people side of things, the collaborative effort, the different stakeholders, the different priorities those stakeholders have. It's a useful exercise for a smooth running operation. But I think another point where, again, based on my experience, that we see people is when they are within their organization convinced of the benefits of machine learning, and recognize that the overhead and the impact it's having on usually their data engineering or machine learning engineering team is quite high. And it is very sensible to begin to standardize and automate as much of the machine learning lifecycle as they possibly can. So either those who are very proactive and have started thinking about it at the beginning, or people who are organizations that are looking to step up their investment.
I think it's also important in the context of, like, if you're in mid-tier in your journey, like, I mean, let's be honest, if you are Uber or Airbnb, where this is stuff that's sold, you're not necessarily the type of customer that we're focusing on. This is, as we've said, for enterprise customers, where machine learning is a tool to help make the business, which isn't machine learning, better. Yeah. But there may be a point where there are just things that you hadn't thought about that you need to think about. So, like, part of this is also regulatory requirements. How do we like quantify the things that you need to keep in mind? So there's like reproducibility and auditability and stuff that is relevant around HIPAA and GDPR and those type of things. So I think it does make sense in terms of, even if you are at the start, like anywhere along it, there may be something that you've missed. So maybe you've got a very good process. Maybe you've taken another methodology and you've implemented that, but you've reached a point where you think you've gotten everything in place. But what we're trying to also bring in is just rigor around what, not just the business requirements, but regulatory things that may trip you up later if you haven't actually contemplated or at least put plans in place to deal with it.
And I think the regulatory point is a really good one, Jeff. Not just because it is a potential risk from an organization's point of view, but also because it's an area that is changing a lot at the moment. And so having an approach to machine learning ops that supports the kind of flexibility that we were talking about earlier, I think is really important. That even if you are in a region that hasn't yet got solid rules or solid expectations from a regulatory standpoint, there is still, this is the time to be thinking about an approach to machine learning in production that allows you to respond to emerging regulation.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So what type of problems have you seen the enterprise organizations facing that has like been blockers? So like when they're trying to get stuff in production, stuff that you're seeing is actually preventing them actually getting that final step going. I just want to preface this with an example. I did a talk at the Data Innovation Summit at one point, and someone in the crowd was saying that they had created, so we're doing the standard churn model and it's scikit-learn, and it's not complicated, it's just like ML 101, but they had this very fancy TensorFlow based model that was very accurate but not in production. So something had happened, and I think it was like a data transformation problem. So that's like one of the impediments. They just actually hadn't managed to get it in production. So what in your experience is things that prevent these things getting all the way to actually being useful?
I think one of the challenges that I will speak to in response to this question is around the output of models being properly integrated into existing business processes. And I think one of the things that I've seen, and again, we touched on this earlier about ML ops being a team sport. It's really important that various stakeholders are involved, and that the methodology you're using allows for this multiplicity of perspectives. So usually when in those situations where practitioners have built a model, it's really accurate, and it's not getting used, or there's no demand that will justify moving this into production, it's because there isn't a very easy way to integrate the output of that model into whatever pathways the business side has for using the output, right? It's kind of, you've built something that looks great on paper, but actually isn't practically useful to the business users. And that's nothing to do with the accuracy of the model, nothing to do with the understanding of the use case. So in some of the examples I've seen, their understanding of the business use case is spot on. Their understanding of the accuracy required by the business side is also spot on. It just doesn't fit in very naturally. And so there is a preference instead in that setting for an older, less accurate approach to providing these insights than the arguably better machine learning enabled approach, because there's not a very natural fit, right?
Okay.
And I think that sometimes happens when data scientists are so focused on the accuracy and not so much the usability. Sometimes that could be down to explainability issues, like the business doesn't understand quite how to justify these predictions, and so therefore are suspicious of it or don't believe that their customers will be open to this. But very often it's just from much early on, haven't thought through how the business side is actually going to consume this.
Yeah, it's interesting because I see the problem somewhat differently and not like the problem I'm exposed to from a customer perspective is what I call the great circle of blame, where the data engineering team and the data science team would possibly have different views as to how the intermediate handover will work. So it is either a structural problem within the business, the teams don't have effective communication mechanisms to deal with this, or it is a tooling problem in that you have a tool that puts out something in one format and another tool that can't read it because you let the individual teams make that decision. Of course, the Cloudera data platform solves all of this, but there is the realistic problem that this does often happen, and we see that where things just don't flow. So the impediment is not the impediment is not the business requirement. The impediment is actually the teams that need to move it from stage to stage actually just don't have a functional agreed format to be able to do this data interchange. Yeah.
I think yes, I agree. I think those are very kind of well recognized pitfalls.
Yeah.
I guess moving on, I was going to raise the question around, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, about at what point do you start worrying and thinking about ML ops? And we said pretty much wherever you are in the journey. But I guess another way that organizations might be able to, or listeners to this live stream, might be able to assess the extent to which this is for them is the question of how many models are in production at the point that this kind of becomes a problem. That's a bit of a how long is a piece of string, right? It depends on the complexity of the models. It
I have
depends
an
on
answer.
physicality. But please, you have an answer, so please share.
So my anecdotal evidence for this is every time I'm meeting someone, a new customer, or doing a talk, I try and get a sense of how many models people have in production. The way I phrase the question is, how many models do you have in production that you built yourself, that are useful to the business, and are currently functioning at a way that you're happy with? I would say about half of the audience is 0. Then like remaining 45% would be 1 or 2. And then there are a couple who will have 3 or more. If someone says to me they have 150 models, I know they're a SaaS user, and then we just don't have that discussion. But generally, like within that range, it's actually a lot fewer than a lot of people think. Yeah. And because of the fact this is hard, this is just like one of those fundamentally very, very difficult things to get right. I see that we're coming up to time now. I did have one last question that I just wanted to wrap up before we try to get questions from the audience is like, are we unique in this in terms of coming up with a framework? Why don't you just use one of the CI/CD type frameworks or Agile or something like that? Is there a substantive difference between what we're trying to put forward and what people are doing in the software development world?
This is an excellent question, which is appropriate because we wrote the question. I think
no, don't tell them; they'll know.
But again, it was one of those questions that we talked a lot about when we were putting the papers together. It's kind of like, why COPML, right? Why not CI/CD? You know, in a world where agile methodologies are prevalent, why not just use that? And we had a bit of a back and forth on this, and we have similar but not necessarily identical takes on this. So I'll give mine. Yeah. I think CI/CD or agile are not bad methodologies. I think, though, that any methodology is best applied in the context in which it was envisioned. And I think looking at methodologies like Agile or CI/CD and recognizing that their origins is in the space of software development is important when thinking about its applicability when it comes to MLOps. Now, I think there are several, there are two key, characteristics of machine learning that make it a more challenging proposition for CI/CD or Agile, and that is data as well as software, right? So it is broader and more entangled, if you like, than conventional software development or software engineering. And as such, I think there might be, while there is overlap, there might be things that we miss out on because those methodologies were not developed with machine learning in mind. That isn't to say there are no advantages to using them. I think if you have CI/CD or Agile, you have a team that are already very familiar with this. I can see the appeal of just extending that. But if anyone who has used Agile in an organization that has fallen in love with the idea and has attempted to apply it to every aspect of its business, if you've been in one of those parts of the business that doesn't have many parallels with software development, you know what a frustrating experience that can be. And I think that's all I'll say in terms of round holes for round pegs. Finding something that fits well is useful. Jeff, okay. I know you have a more nuanced take, I would say.
So my main differentiator is that CI/CD is creating software products, whereas this is creating machine learning models, and machine learning models can be iteratively changed by the machines themselves. It's all about automation and feedback loops. Like Agile is not going to create Skynet, but COPML can, right? Because it is about the mechanisms for the machines to go back and automate each of the processes. So you can have something that's changing constantly without human input. And I know continuous delivery talks about that. But when you are in the process of, I need to move this box here, it is a human-based decision, but I need to retrain and change a hyperparameter can be fully automated, and the end product still remains within that context. So I think that's where it starts to extend. I did have one last question. We actually have never discussed this. Is it COPML or COPML?
Oh, it is definitely COPML.
Okay.
I feel like COPML sounds like a condition.
Okay, so you heard it here first, folks. That's officially it's COPML. You may not call it COPML, otherwise Ade's going to get you. Alrighty. Yeah, I think our time is up. So from my perspective, I just want to say thank you all. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Ade, for this illuminating chat. It's always good to chat. You're one of my smartest colleagues, and I really enjoy having this discussion, and I really enjoyed writing the paper with you. So thank you very much.
It was a lot of fun. And please, everyone, please come for the live stream when we look into this in a bit more detail. And having had this teaser, please come with questions.
Alrighty. Thank you. Bye.